my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. The prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition will improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life. Despite this, most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition. Needed goes way beyond bare minimums with products that can fully meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. Needed's radically better nutritional system is third-party tested and rigorously developed with the endorsement of over 6,000 women's health experts. In addition to their prenatal multivitamins and pre and probiotics, I am obsessed with their cognitive support supplement, which helps with brain fog, which I know is such a struggle when you're postpartum. At this point, I've talked to so many Birth Hour listeners who have discovered Needed through the podcast, and I love hearing the feedback that they're feeling better during pregnancy since starting with Needed's prenatal vitamins. Needed has all your needs covered from preconception to postpartum and beyond. Needed also simplifies things by bundling core products into easy and flexible monthly plans. You can use the code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order and up to 40% off monthly plans at thisisneeded.com. Since this discount applies to your first order only, I always recommend going with one of the plans for the best value. At the end of this episode, I talked to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and what makes their products really stand out. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/birth hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/birth hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Chelsea, and she has 2 birth stories to share, both at birth centers, and she also talks about some unique things that came up for her postpartum. All right, let's hear from Chelsea. Hi, Chelsea. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, we have 2 stories today, but before we get to that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. My name is Chelsea. My husband and I have been together for 13 and a half years, married for 5, and we have 2 wonderful kids, a 3.5-year-old son and a 7-month-old daughter. I'm a behavior analyst that works with kids with disabilities, and I've been listening to the Birth Hour for at least 10 years. I used to listen on my drives. We lived in a different state, and they would be 3 hours back and forth pretty much every month, and I just listened all that time. So I think it really helped me feel empowered and prepared for my own birth story. So I'm really excited to talk about them today.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, you must have been around since the very beginning because it's 10 years this year. So very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and go back to your first pregnancy and what that looked like.
Sure. So when we decided to start trying, I was worried because my cycles hadn't normalized after stopping birth control, but we ended up getting lucky and conceiving the first ovulation. And my pregnancy was really textbook with my son. I had a little bit of spotting at 6 weeks, and we ended up doing some progesterone just for peace of mind. My numbers looked a little bit lower, but I did have a lot of anxiety during that pregnancy. I think I did so much research before getting pregnant. I listened to the birth hour a ton. I learned so much, and I prepped a lot, but I think knowing kind of the what ifs and what could go wrong didn't really help my anxiety. But I was really grateful that I had done that ahead of time because I had made a lot of decisions, and when actually pregnant, decisions felt really overwhelming. So I didn't really have to think too much about what I wanted for my births and things like that because I had kind of already decided. So that was actually really helpful for me. We transferred care to a freestanding birth center at 12 weeks, and it was about 40 minutes away from us. It's actually the only midwife-owned birth center in Massachusetts, and they're kind of rare in our area. So I was really thankful that it had recently opened up because I knew that that's the kind of care that I wanted. And we really liked that it was treated like a normal time in life versus a medical condition. And my husband was skeptical initially of out-of-hospital births, but luckily he was finishing up his PhD at the time, and it was still that COVID time where a lot of things were remote. So he was able to go to every appointment with me, and that helped him feel a lot more comfortable. And he really enjoyed the care that we got there as well. So yeah, my pregnancy was pretty straightforward. My son didn't move a whole lot, and I think that also contributed to my anxiety. But overall, I felt really good, and I walked a ton. People suggested walking and listening to birth stories. I knew that that was a really good way to get some exercise in and prepare. So I did walk a ton with him. He was due in August, so I had nice weather, luckily. I tried to keep the mindset that I'd probably go to 42 weeks so I wouldn't get stressed out and frustrated waiting when my due date came. But he actually ended up coming early, which totally surprised me. So at 5:45 a.m. on August 2nd, I was 39 plus 1. I rolled over in bed and I felt a small gush of fluid, and I was like, I don't know, what is this? And then I waited, and then I felt another little gush. And so I was like, okay, this must be my water. And so I woke my husband up and I told him that my water had broken. And surprisingly, he was super calm about it. I expected a little bit bigger of a reaction, but he was really calm. So we got up and we took my last photos for my 9 months in photo. And when the midwives opened, I called them and let them know. And they just asked me a couple questions and said, let us know if anything changes. So we spent the day walking. I did some curb walking, which I really dislike. And then I had one last thing on my to-do list to clean out the pantry. So we cleaned out the pantry, and I just tried to get things going. I was kind of hoping to feel something. But by 5:30 that night, nothing had happened. I didn't notice any feelings, anything. So I was feeling a little bit defeated. So we decided to go to Target and get a pump to try and speed things along, and also to get Dairy Queen because very pregnant in the summer means Dairy Queen, at least for me, that pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we let our families know what was happening. I didn't tell them initially when my water broke because I didn't want everybody asking questions and checking in throughout the day when nothing had happened. So we let them know because we talked to the midwives, and they had told us if nothing happened overnight, that we could come in the morning and try a tincture or something to try to help things along. I tried to do the pump, but the pump that they had at Target had huge flanges that didn't do anything. And so I got kind of upset and was feeling like we would end up with an induction because nothing was happening at all. So I just decided around 8 o'clock to go to bed and try to relax and rest. So we kind of just went to bed, laid down. And then at 9:30, I felt a contraction, and I knew immediately that it was different. And 5 minutes later, there was another one. So I told my husband and I called the midwives, and they said what I hear all the time, which is what I was expecting, which is, okay, try to ignore them and get some rest, and then let us know if anything changes. And I just kind of said, okay, yep, sure. But in my head, I was thinking, I already can ignore these. But I hung up with them and I went to use the bathroom, and I had a few contractions on the toilet. And so I had my husband call our doula, and they were super intense. So I was like, okay, I think I could use someone here to help out. And so she said she could be there in about an hour. She lives close to the birth center, so a little further from us. But then she heard me during a contraction and suggested that we call the midwives back then. She was like, I'll still get ready, but talk to them again and we'll see before I come all the way to you. So I guess I sounded like things were happening. And so I called the midwives back and they suggested getting in the shower and seeing if things slowed down. And so I did that. They did not slow down at all, but the shower felt really good. And I remember thinking at some point, oh, I can make noise. I was really quiet. And I know I've heard people talk about like making noise in labor. And so I started to do that and I got pretty loud and it definitely felt like it helped me. But that was kind of my thing through the rest of this labor. So my husband was timing them while I was in the shower, the contractions, and they were about 2 minutes apart. So we called the midwives back and told them, and they said we could head to the birth center. So we got there at about midnight. The car ride was really tough. It was really intense. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe we should just go to the hospital. I don't see how I'm going to be able to do this for 20 more hours. Thinking in my head of all the stories I hear, first time births take a while. They intensify. I was really worried it was going to get even more intense than this. But I didn't say it out loud. I remember thinking that. And when we got there, I was 6 centimeters dilated and I told them I absolutely need the tub. So I got in the tub and I labored on my knees with my head pressed up against the tub. I was pushing my head against the tub during contractions and having my husband give counter pressure on my tailbone while my doula kind of helped me stay hydrated and reminded me to drink. I remember being really loud and I kept telling my poor husband to push harder because the pushing on my tailbone was the only thing that felt like it was really giving me some relief. And then I remember quickly feeling like I had to push and that was the only thing that was going to help the sensation I was having. And so my midwife asked if she could check me just to see and agreed that everything was good to go. And so I pushed for about 45 minutes. I did need some help directing my energy. So I was being really loud. And I remember the midwife saying, I know you probably don't care, but you're probably going to lose your voice. And I was like, I don't care. And she was like, well, if you direct that energy down to help push him out. And so once I was able to direct that energy down instead of kind of letting it out, that really helped him get moving. And they did have me turn over onto my back because I kept lifting up out of the tub. It felt like I needed to straighten my leg and lift up. And so, they're concerned about his face coming out of the water. So they did have me turn over and help him out a little bit. He had his hand up by his face and he was not a small baby. He ended up being 9 pounds, born at 39 plus 2, and 21 and a half inches long. And just for reference, I'm 5'4" and 110 pounds pre-pregnancy. So he's pretty big comparatively.
Yeah.
My husband's 6'4", so we were really curious about his size.
Yeah.
And I had always said, I was as soon as he's the right size for my body will just go into labor. So if that's early, then that's what'll happen. And I think that's exactly what happened. But I felt amazing and empowered by the whole thing. It was exactly the kind of birth I had hoped for. And it was super quick. It was really intense, but really fast. And I kind of appreciated that.
Yeah, very fast.
Yeah. So yeah, I think 9:30 and then he was born at 2:45. So the postpartum with him was tough. He didn't latch well. He had the tongue ties and the lip ties, and we struggled with breastfeeding for the first few weeks before we got his ties released. And I think that was the main thing that I wish I had done differently was advocating a little bit more, because as soon as he was born and they put him on my chest, I had said he doesn't look like he can open his mouth wide enough to latch. He's having trouble doing that. But I had an oversupply and a really fast letdown. So I was using a nipple shield and he was gaining weight, and he was a big baby. He didn't lose a lot of weight and he gained very easily. So it wasn't until he was screaming and crying every time I tried to feed him that someone suggested going to the dentist and seeing about a revision. So I do wish that I kind of pushed that a little bit harder. But after the revision, thankfully, we were able to breastfeed until he was 2.5, and I weaned him while I was pregnant with my daughter. The other thing about postpartum that I dealt with, a couple things myself, which was I had full body hives at 2 weeks postpartum, which I guess is not super uncommon, but it was so uncomfortable. And it took a while to kind of figure out what to do with it. I ended up having to take Allegra and Pepcid together after I went to the allergist, and that was the only thing that helped. And then I also had urinary pain that no one could really figure out. It kind of came and went, and it felt like a bad UTI, but it wasn't one. And my OB ended up prescribing estrogen cream that kind of helped until it faded around 12 weeks. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with my daughter, because it did come back with my daughter. But it was something I really wasn't expecting that made that like immediate postpartum period like a bit more difficult.
Yeah, it's not fun when you have to deal with those things for your own body when you're also trying to figure out how to take care of a baby. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear more about it with your next postpartum as well. And speaking of that one, let's go ahead and talk about your pregnancy with her.
Great. Okay. So we knew we wanted to have another baby around 3 years age gap. But my son was still nursing through the night at like 21 months old. He wasn't a great sleeper. And so I night weaned him to a 6-hour stretch during that time to try to hopefully get my fertility back so that once he turned 2, we could start trying again. And thankfully that helped. And we were able to conceive quickly after he turned 2. And that was my daughter. It was a lot different, this pregnancy, in terms of being anxious. I wasn't anxious with her really at all. We were super excited. We were hoping to have a girl, just 1 and 1 would be fun. And we found out pretty early with the NIPT that she was a girl, and she moved a ton. Both with her and my son, I had anterior placentas, and I thought that might be why I didn't feel my son move a ton when I was pregnant with him. But with her, even though I had that, I still felt flutters at 13 weeks and a lot of movement. She moved a ton. And I think that helped with my anxiety. And then just being busy with a toddler, doing all the things, I think helped. So her pregnancy also was super uneventful. I really enjoyed it, and I tried to like really live in the moment with it after feeling like I kind of missed out on some of that with my son just by being nervous. And so she did decide to stay in longer than him. And that was the only time that I struggled a bit, because everyone seemed to be convinced that she would come earlier for some reason. So I didn't have that same mindset. And she, at 39 plus 4, I had like a minor meltdown over being pregnant still, which sounds so silly now because I wasn't even at my due date yet. But because he came around 39 weeks, I was like, this is the longest I've ever been pregnant, and I'm so excited. So
yeah,
I had a meltdown, and my husband suggested we go to Target again. We love just a trip, go get a Starbucks and walk around.
Not Dairy Queen this time.
Yeah, no, this time I wanted a pink drink from Starbucks. So
nice.
So we went there, and then we came home, and I put my son to bed, and I was sitting with him until he fell asleep. And I noticed around 8 o'clock when I was sitting there that I was having these like feelings that felt like contractions, but they weren't really anything compared to the contractions I felt last time. And I had been getting them on and off randomly throughout that last little bit of pregnancy. So I didn't think too much about it. But then sitting there, I noticed that they were about 12 to 14 minutes, like kept coming. But I didn't think that really meant anything. But I did take that time to remind him that like we might have to go have the baby soon, and that my mom would be here if he woke up, just to prep him and remind him. He was very anxious for the baby to come out. He had been waiting for her to be the size of a watermelon to come out, like on the apps, and the app does that at like 36 weeks. So he kept asking, like, she's the size of a watermelon. Why isn't she here yet?
Oh, yeah. It just kind of stops at some point.
Yeah, it just stops. And then he's like, wait.
Bigger watermelon.
Yeah. And he's like, why isn't she here? And he kept being like, come out, baby, come out. So that was really sweet. So I went to bed to rest and just tracked the contractions, and they kept coming. But I really thought like, this isn't anything compared to last time. Like it'll probably just fizzle out. I don't want to get my hopes up. I just had that meltdown, but I did have to pause and like breathe through them. So I asked my mom to come spend the night at our house just in case, because one of the things I was worried about with my daughter was a car baby. Just knowing how fast the previous birth was and having to go that 40 minutes, I was nervous that she was going to be even faster. And I did not want to have my baby in the car. So she came to stay with us just in case. And by 10 p.m., my husband was convinced that this was it, even though I kept telling him, like, it might not be. And I had been convinced that labor hadn't started earlier on because she wasn't low and engaged like my son had been. She was still moving all around and pretty high up. So I had been trying to like get her into position by like doing the different positionings on like the mile circuit and things like that, and doing cat and cow. So I was doing that on the bed when I heard a pop and my water gushed like all over the bed, much more than the last time. The last time was like a little bit. This was like, I was absolutely soaked, but thankfully I had a waterproof pad under me from, listening to birth stories and things like that. So it was about 1:00 in the morning, and I called the midwives, and they said, well, you can see how the contractions feel now that your water's broken, or you can just come. They weren't worried about us coming too soon because of my last birth. And my husband convinced me that we should avoid a tough car ride and just go right away, because last time the car ride was really tough. And I'm really glad that he said that. But we made my son a video telling him that we were going to have the baby, so that my mom could show him when he woke up. We've never spent a night away from him, so I just wanted to make sure that he felt comfortable. And so the contractions intensified a lot during that ride, so I'm really glad that we went when my husband said, like, let's just go, so that we're already there and we don't have to worry again about having a baby in the car. But every time I had a contraction in the car, I completely flooded myself, which I didn't really expect from last time. But every time there was a lot of water. So very thankful that we had seat protectors. We moved the car seat, and I was like where my son's car seat would usually be. And thankfully it had a seat protector on it, because it was a mess. So we got to the birth center around 1:30. Looking at my notes, I don't know how we did that, but I think maybe nighttime, less traffic, but I was thankful for that. And we went in and she checked me, and I don't remember what she said because I wasn't really worried about it after last time. I feel like last time I was concerned that they would tell me it was too soon and send me home, but this time I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I don't even remember, but I asked them to get the tub ready, and they did. And I got in the tub in that same position on my knees with my head against the tub, and kind of like my sweet spot. Labor with my daughter felt a lot more calm and intentional. I was a lot more aware. Like, I was aware of all the sensations. Like, I could feel her still moving around and kicking her little feet. I remember at one point being like, look, her feet are there. Like, you could see them even during labor, during contractions. And I was talking to my husband and my doula between the contractions. And then I would kind of just let them know, like, okay, one is starting to get intense. And then they would stop and they would help me through it. So it was definitely a different experience, I think, knowing what to expect. And like, I was definitely more aware. By 3 a.m., I felt the urge to push. And I remember at one point feeling her literally drop down and turn. And I said, okay, I think she's ready now. Like, I felt her. And the midwife agreeing, like, I don't know if she checked or she looked, but she was like, oh, yep, you're right. And so then I started pushing, and I remember feeling her hair and the ring of fire that people talk about. And again, I kept trying to stand up and kind of like straighten my legs. And the midwife had to remind me to keep my butt in the water. And so I was able to push out her head, and then the tone kind of changed and things felt intense. The midwife told me to stand up and instructed me to push as hard as I could. And in her voice, I could hear like some urgency, and I wasn't sure why, but I pushed really, really hard as I possibly could. And it kind of felt like she was tugging on the baby. And after like one or two pushes like that, my daughter was born at 3:35. It was the summer solstice and a strawberry moon, which is kind of cool. I remember seeing it on the drive, a big red moon. But she was born on the first day of summer. And that was really neat. But the reason that it was kind of urgent and I felt that tugging, I guess, was that her cord was wrapped around her neck a couple times and her body. And then it was like tangled up in her hands, the midwife said. So,
wow. She's busy in there.
yeah, I mean, she never stopped moving. So it kind of made sense. But so the midwife said that she kind of wasn't like descending, like once her head was there, she wasn't really like budging. And then she had to like untangle her as she came out. But when she came out, so they said like she's a little stunned and it took her like a second maybe to like get her untangled and kind of get her perked up a little bit. But then she was perfect. She was healthy. She has a pair of lungs on her like no other baby. She made sure we knew that she was not happy about that. And so we were super relieved she was fine. And postpartum with her was a lot smoother. She nursed well right away. She does also have ties like my son did, but they haven't impacted her at all. She's been able to nurse from the very beginning, and that was a huge relief. But I was prepared, like I was ready for it this time. So I was surprised and like pleasantly surprised that we didn't have to deal with that again. I was also prepared for the hives that I got last time and the urinary pain. So I think it made it more bearable because I did get a little bit of itching. And as soon as I did, I took the medicines that I took last time and it went away. And then the urinary pain did come back and I used that estrogen cream again. But I went to the urologist or back to the urologist to a different one. And we think that it was related to or caused by pelvic floor spasms, which I guess are a thing that can happen with low estrogen, which happens with breastfeeding. So that was interesting. And I wanted to mention it because for me, it was really, I went to so many different people and nobody could figure it out the first time. And it was really defeating to feel like that every time I went to the bathroom for like weeks and then it would go away and it would come back. And this time I was able to use the estrogen cream and they said just use it more frequently because it seemed to help. And then as I would forget to use it, if the pain didn't come back, I just stopped. And again, it faded around 12 weeks. So it was interesting that it's not something I'd ever heard of.
I'm glad you got something that helped though with both those things because it feels like things that a lot of times are just like, well, it'll get better, and there's not really a good answer. So I'm glad you kept looking.
Yeah. And I remember with my first, I like crying to the midwife and saying like, I feel like I'm being punished for having like such an easy pregnancy and birth, like everything went perfectly. And then those first like 8 weeks or so were so hard for me because I had those hives were awful. And then when the hives resolved, then the urinary pain came and she was like, you don't have to make up for having a good experience, So I was glad that this time, at least I felt a little bit more prepared for it. And like, we kind of had a plan, but I definitely wanted to mention it in case it happens to someone else. Cause it was really rough.
With the estrogen cream, would you put it like on your urethra or was it more like for your inside? Okay.
Yeah, it's the same one that they like the instructions on the things. They come with an applicator. But yeah, that's what it was like a pea-sized amount. Okay. Like around your urethra.
Okay. I've heard of them for like inside your vagina for like tissue healing and things like that. But yeah, I hadn't heard of it for helping with like a peeing burning sensation.
Yeah. And I didn't, and again, they didn't know, and they thought maybe a kidney stone or something like that the first time. But then this urologist, just because it was the one that could get me in, he said, like, it really sounds like pelvic floor spasms. And my pelvic floor still now, could use work after the two of them. So it made sense once I looked it up. I guess it's common in like menopause and things like that for women to get pelvic floor spasms that cause that. But
good to know.
Yeah. So, but breastfeeding causes that same low estrogen. So,
all right.
I guess it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Anything else from postpartum or do you want to share resources?
I could share resources.
All right. Yeah. What do you have for us?
So I did a lot of research, like I said before. One of the things, obviously, is the birth hour. I listened to tons of birth stories and I got a lot of my resources from listening to birth stories too. I did do the Know Your Options childbirth course. Yeah. And that was super helpful. That was the main thing that we did before my son, and my husband really appreciated that. It was nice. Again, it was like during COVID. I purchased it before I was even pregnant. And then we watched it. But it was nice because there wasn't a lot of in-person options either anyways. But I really liked having that we could go at our own pace and like really talk about all the different things.
Awesome.
So that was really helpful.
Good.
And then I read Real Food for Pregnancy by Lily Nichols. I love that book. I think she has a new one now, but I really...
Yeah, she has one like specifically for gestational diabetes, right?
Yes, and I think she just came out with one for fertility too.
Oh, okay.
But because I follow her on Instagram. But so that book was really great. I still sometimes reference it for like nutritional stuff. So I enjoyed that one. We used The Birth Partner by Penny Simpkin. My husband read that. And even just knowing that he had it and kind of was doing something that was really nice to have. But he said that was really useful. And she has another book, Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn. That's kind of like a book that has like everything. Something that I really appreciated was like there's new like information about newborn care in there, which I feel like a lot of times you forget about. And then I listened to Orgasmic Birth by Elizabeth Davis and Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. I did the audiobooks of those while I walked. And then I really appreciated your book, The First Time Mom's Pregnancy Handbook. I gave that to my husband, and I also liked it for myself as like a quick check.
Yeah, they really limited my word count on that. So it is good for that.
I really liked it because I had all this information, and then I got really anxious when I was actually pregnant. I didn't want to like go back into things, but that one I could just look at and be like, okay, these are the important things to know, right?
Awesome.
So that was useful. And then I took a breastfeeding class through the IBCLC. She had like an online one that I thought was really useful. Safe Infant Sleep. I read that book also by James McKenna. And then a book that I listened to later on, not right immediately postpartum, but I really liked, was called To Have and to Hold by Molly Millwood. And so it's not necessarily directly birth related, but it was about like becoming a mom and like how your life and relationships change once you have kids. And I listened to it when I went back to work, like on my drive back and forth. And it really helped me feel understood. So I thought that might be a good one to include.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds familiar, but I don't think I've read it. Well, yes, you did do your research. So definitely send us those links and we'll get them all in the show notes. And what's the best way for people to connect with you?
They can leave a comment on the Birth Hour website.
Okay. Yeah. And just go to your show notes and then I will let you know if there's comments so you'll see them.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to talk to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and all of the great products from Needed. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about Needed again.
Brand, I'm so excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of the new things happening over at Needed, can you just share with my listeners a little bit about who you are and your role at Needed?
Absolutely. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Needed.
All right. So I recommend Needed to my listeners, my followers on Instagram all the time. I've been using the products for over a year now. And I just really love that with your perinatal products, you really go beyond the bare minimum. And it's just really important, especially for the people in my audience, because we know that during the stages of life where you're growing babies and feeding babies are especially nutritionally demanding. So I love that you guys are addressing these nutrient deficiencies and talking about now that not all prenatal vitamins are created equally. And on that note, your team just released the results of an IRB study highlighting these differences between standard prenatal vitamins versus Neededs. Can you just talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. This has been a baby of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But basically, there is overwhelming evidence that proper nutrient levels can improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life for both mother and baby thereafter. Yet, as we all know, despite our little kind of communities, nutrition has not been front and center in the perinatal standard of care. And most prenatals on the market provide bare minimum nutrition support. We're designing and conducting studies to add to the clinical literature to unequivocally prove that women deserve more support, resources, and radically better nutritional care. We really just fundamentally think the evidence just cannot be ignored anymore, as the lack of nutritional support is really failing women and children. So our goal for this study specifically was to take a more comprehensive look at nutritional status in pregnancy. The study compared nutritional characteristics between women taking the needed prenatal multi and a standard prenatal vitamin.
Okay.
We collected survey data and analyzed nutrient biomarkers, so nutrient levels actually in the blood themselves, in a diverse group of 235 adult pregnant women across 7 U.S. states. And what's really exciting and what you're hinting towards is that the results actually revealed quite striking insights into how maternal nutrition status differs by the type of prenatal vitamin a woman is taking during pregnancy. Specifically, we found that women taking the needed prenatal multi had higher blood levels of key nutrients for pregnancy, including vitamin D, B6, selenium, and zinc, among a number of others. When we compared prenatal subgroups, we found that only the group of women taking the needed multi had sufficient blood levels of vitamin D and vitamin B6 compared to the group taking the standard prenatal. And nutrients like vitamin D and B6 play key roles in pregnancy in supporting both maternal and baby health outcomes. So it's really exciting. And it's also important to reiterate that our study was diverse and the prenatal groups were comparable on several key factors outside of their prenatal vitamins. This is really important for the rigor of the study. So for example, 1/3 of the women in each group identified as a race ethnicity other than white, and women in both groups were in similar stages of their pregnancy.
Okay, and what does the IRB part mean?
The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're basically a committee that reviews clinical research involving human subjects to ensure that certain ethical standards are met.
Okay, it's super important when studying pregnant women.
Super important when studying pregnant women, and in terms of showing proper kind of rigor and study design went into the methodology of how we conducted the research as well.
Right. So one thing that I thought was interesting is that a lot of this past studies weren't even done on pregnant women or even women. Oftentimes it was like based on white men as far as vitamin levels and things like that. So as you mentioned, these are really striking results. And what does this really mean for women in the trying to conceive or pregnancy or postpartum season of life? Like, what should we be taking away from this data?
You're right that sort of there is a lot of missing gaps in the research, though we also have found that there is a lot of really good research emphasizing the need for better nutrition at this stage of life. But overall, we see this study as adding to the growing body of evidence showing that, one, meeting nutritional needs through diet alone is very challenging in modern context. So supplementation is needed. Two, that most pregnant women in the U.S. fail to meet dietary recommendations for certain key nutrients that are very important for pregnancy, like vitamin D. And third, I think increased evidence that standard prenatals are really falling short in closing the gap between nutritional needs and dietary intake. And overall, we hope this study leads to more clinicians and moms advocating for the nutrition that is needed for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I've been sharing about this with my followers on Instagram from some of the data you guys are talking about. And one thing I thought was really interesting was the statistic about how few care providers are discussing nutrition with pregnant and postpartum women at all.
Yeah, that is absolutely striking. We found that nearly 80% of women reported receiving little to no nutritional advice from their OBGYN during their pregnancy care.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up on the podcast a lot because I feel like people really notice a difference when they have midwifery care versus OBGYNs because nutrition is something that's talked about in these much longer prenatal appointments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part of feeling good throughout pregnancy. And I know that one thing that Needed really focuses on as well is that it's not just during pregnancy, but also postpartum. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We equate it in a lot of ways to nutritional depletion, and that a lot of the importance for this life stage is avoiding depletion. So meaning when your body lacks the essential vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are really needed for optimal function. And depletion is not something that occurs only through pregnancy, but women are more vulnerable in critical life stages such as pregnancy and breastfeeding. So that postpartum stage that you mentioned right there. And a lot of the problem is that women go into pregnancy already depleted and then increase their depletion in growing baby, so end up in a pretty tough spot postpartum. Mm-hmm. There are many contributors to this depletion, from nutrient deficient soil and stress. And then the signs of depletion like brittle nails, fatigue, headaches, mood changes, thinning hair, constipation, dry skin, all sound pretty familiar to us, right? Mm-hmm. And really research suggests that up to 95% of women experience nutritional depletion even when they are on a prenatal vitamin.
Oh my gosh.
Depletion is, I think, a much bigger problem than we actually, have historically given it credit. And a lot of us, women just assume we have to feel these things, these signs of depletion, just as part of our, that's just the status quo. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of our sort of emphasis is showing that no, radically better is possible. There are ways to better support ourselves through nutrition to minimize those signs of depletion.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone recording their birth story, and they were saying how, they were super focused on their nutrition during pregnancy, and then it kind of fell to the wayside postpartum. And it's like especially if you're breastfeeding, it's taking a lot of energy and nutrients, and then you're also sleep deprived because you have a new baby. So the depletion, I think, like you mentioned, is just something we really need to focus on beyond pregnancy.
Yeah, and most care providers aren't really reminding folks. They think of it as like a prenatal, not a perinatal.
Right.
There are some postnatals that exist, but I think the use of them in that breastfeeding life stage that is actually more nutritionally intensive than pregnancy is a non-supported part of this life stage. And, where we see so many women really talking about that postpartum period being the most difficult. And I think being able to advocate and raise awareness to better support and how do we care for mom, not just care for baby during that stage is very important.
Yes, I'm just nodding along to everything over here. So are there any other supplements that women should consider outside of a prenatal to help fight depletion?
Absolutely. So most prenatals and aren't included are vitamin and mineral blends. And there are many other nutrients that are supportive of combating nutrition. Unfortunately, we just don't think that there's a single product that can fully get you over the hill on depletion lack. So it needed what we are really focused on rather than just a single product, that we do hero our prenatal multi a lot, but really an emphasis on a system of products is most supportive. And for example, we do offer an omega-3 DHA EPA add-on. So DHA omega is often something that you probably do hear as part of taking that alongside your prenatal. And DHA and EPA are very supportive of a healthy pregnancy. Sometimes they are combined with a prenatal multi, but we often see that can lead to kind of lack of nutrient integrity or too low of doses. So we do think it is important to offer it as a separate product for that reason, but do advocate for that being added on to your system of products. And then there's a whole host of other products depending on needs. I personally really love our sleep support. As lack of sleep is a big contributor to depletion. And I also really love our breastfeeding safe cognitive support product. It's a product that really helps me sort of feel like me and try to do it all by being a working mom while still, breastfeeding and chasing after my kids. Being able to focus when I need to focus is a critical part of that.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So you guys offer several bundles and things like that with these add-ons. Where's the best place for people to start if they're trying to decide what's right for them?
Our website does help to guide you by sort of life stage or need, which is thisisneeded.com, or we're at Needed on Instagram. And we actually have a team of trained nutritionists and doulas as part of our customer support team. So they're eager and ready to help if you do want to sort of DM us or email us if you kind of get stuck on the website your own. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd also really recommend folks to go to thisisneeded.com/thrive to learn more about the prenatal study and the rigor that went into it, and a lot more results beyond what we're able to share today.
Yes, it's so fascinating. And I'm the same way. Like, I can't squeeze it all in to share on Instagram either. And so I'm like, please go check it out, because it really is amazing what you guys were able to find out from this study. And I love that people are available in the DMs to help guide, because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when choosing your prenatal. And starting with the main prenatal is obviously a great choice, but I know lots of people want to take advantage of these bundles too. So that's great to know that it's available to DM or email.
Yeah, I think we're here to help, and it's really a passion of a lot of members of the team to do so. So we're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for chatting with me about all of this. It's always great to hear what you guys are up to, and I'm always happy to share with my listeners about Needed.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much again to Chelsea for sharing her stories with us, and to Needed, as always, for sponsoring this episode. Be sure to use that coupon code BIRTHHOUR at thisisneeded.com to get all stocked up on your vitamins and supplements. You can find Chelsea's resources and more information from her episode by heading over to thebirthhour.com and just searching for her name in the search bar.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.